Hello there. Today I will share a tale that will restore your faith in human compassion and the profound impact one person's empathy can have. Enjoy the story. Emily Thompson was no wilting flower, despite her delicate 5'4" frame and porcelain complexion. With her lithe dancer's body, piercing green eyes, and thick auburn hair always tied back in a neat ponytail, the 25-year-old nurse brought a sophisticated beauty to the drab hospital wards. But it was her fierce determination that truly set her apart. From a young age, Emily had fantasized about becoming a big-shot cardiac surgeon, raking in the big bucks, sure, but more importantly, saving lives with her skilled hands. She could still vividly recall watching her first open-heart surgery on TV at 8 years old, utterly transfixed as the surgeon's precise movements mended what once was broken. Her drive had made her a standout academic performer, securing her admission to the prestigious Eastwood University's medical program. Emily had celebrated by throwing an intimate gathering at her apartment, popping a pricey bottle of Whispering Angel Rose with her doting father Richard and her gaggle of ride-or-die besties. "This is just the first step, you guys," Emily had proclaimed, rosy-cheeked and tinged with vodka courage. "One day you'll all be calling me Dr. Badass, the most sought-after cardiothoracic surgeon in the country." Her friends had squealed in delight, clinking plastic cups and envisioning the lavish lifestyles their brilliant, beautiful Emily would soon enjoy. Privately, Mousy Tiffany wondered if she'd finally be able to snag a date once Emily started rolling in piles of doctor money. Sadly, Emily's path had been rocky from the start. Her mother Diane had died giving birth to her due to catastrophic hemorrhaging and complications, a painful memory that haunted Emily whenever she dared imagine her own future daughter arriving in the world. Richard had done his best as a single dad working 70-hour weeks at the auto plant, but he could never quite grasp how to nurture a young girl's emotional needs. "Sorry, kiddo, I'm just no good at that frilly bonding stuff," he'd lament, ruffling Emily's hair with his calloused hands. "But you know your old man would take a bullet for you, right?" The real trauma came in Emily's second year at Eastwood. Her dad Richard was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor, and the floor collapsed beneath Emily's feet. She had no choice but to drop out and move back home, caring for her father full-time as his cognitive functions deteriorated. It was a role reversal of cruelly ironic proportions. Richard had sacrificed so much to raise Emily as a child, working double shifts and tucking her in with bedtime stories after her mother's passing. Now here was Emily, spoon-feeding her father his meals, bathing his withered body, and watching him suffer until finally drawing his final agonizing breath. "I had to be there for him, like he had been for me all those years," she later confided to Tiffany over a pint of Haagen-Dazs and a mountain of crumpled tissues. "But God, seeing him like that ... IT ripped my heart out. I've never felt so alone." With her dad gone and her funds depleted from dropping out, Emily could no longer afford Eastwood's exorbitant tuition fees. Her dream of becoming a surgeon seemed permanently derailed. Thankfully, Emily's medical school professors had taken notice of her immense potential. They rallied around her, helping the grief-stricken young woman land a nursing gig at the prestigious Shady Oaks Clinic. "You're one of the brightest students we've ever had," Dr. Martinez had insisted, squeezing Emily's hand. "This is just a detour, not the end of the road. Keep pushing forward." And push forward Emily did, quickly becoming a standout nurse known for her compassion and excellent bedside manner. Patients fawned over her nurturing presence, with even the most curmudgeonly old-timers left flustered by her radiant smile. "Well, ain't she just the purtiest lil' thing?" One retired steelworker swooned after Emily had delicately fluffed his pillows. "If I had to spend one more night in this place, I would 'a' offed myself." But Nurse Emily's smiling face made the whole thing bearable. Not everyone was enamored with the sweet young nurse, however. The bitter, perpetually scowling head nurse Victoria Crabtree saw Emily as a direct threat to her reign of terror over the hospital wards. At 48 years old, Crabtree was a spindly, frizzy-haired virago who had long ago allowed the job's endless stress to extinguish any inkling of bedside compassion. "That little prig acts like she's better than the rest of us hard-working folks," Crabtree snarled to anyone within earshot, her voice a cantankerous rasp. With her perfect hair and her sickening treating patients with dignity crap. Well, she can take that sugary bullshit and shove it. This is my turf. Crabtree made it her personal mission to sabotage Emily at every turn, doubling her workload, disobeying her instructions, even going so far as to accidentally spill puddings and smear them into the younger nurse's pristine white sneakers. Whenever Emily gently tried to assert herself, Crabtree would bellow with condescending cackles and cut her down with a flurry of demoralizing insults. "Listen up, you naive little twit. I've been running this place since before you were nothing but a gleam in your daddy's eye. You keep that pouty mouth of yours zipped, and maybe, just maybe, you'll survive your first year here." Emily took the abuse in stride, her bright spirits refusing to be dampened. She knew the miserable old bat was simply lashing out over her own unhappiness. "The best revenge is to kill her with kindness," Emily would repeat like a mantra, and so she did, refusing to stoop to Crabtree's level while continuing to tend to her patients with unwavering care and empathy. One fateful night, however, Emily's virtues would be put to the ultimate test. A seemingly homeless vagrant named Eugene stumbled through the clinic doors, wheezing and utterly disheveled. His tattered clothes reeked of stale vomit and cheaper booze. His matted beard was dusted with grime, and his eyes were wild with fear and desperation. The other nurses recoiled in utter disgust. All except Emily, of course. Rushing to the man's aid without hesitation, she looped his bony arm around her narrow shoulders and half-carried, half-dragged him to a private room. There, she painstakingly tended to him, gently cleaning the filth from his hair and body, feeding him saltine crackers and tepid broth, despite the risks of disciplinary action. "I couldn't just leave him out there, suffering on the street," Emily explained through fresh tears as Tiffany arrived for their usual night shift changeover. Her voice cracked with emotion. "He reminded me of my dad towards the end, you know. So frail, so scared." As the night stretched on in relative quiet, Eugene regained his vitality, and inexplicably, the two formed a powerful bond over their respective struggles and losses. Emily opened up about her mother's tragic passing, about dropping out of med school to care for her dying father, about the soul-crushing loneliness of having her dreams ripped away. In turn, Eugene spoke huskily about life on the streets, exposing the grim realities and injustices faced by society's most vulnerable members. He waxed philosophic about human nature, how the wealthiest man and the most destitute pauper were equal in the eyes of God and the universe. His words resonated deeply within Emily, reawakening a primal need to fight for the downtrodden. By morning's first light, a profound connection had blossomed between the nurse and vagrant, a spiritual kinship of two kindred souls who had been forged from suffering into warriors for compassion and empathy. Emily emerged from the room, her face beaming with a sense of inner peace and purpose. That's when all hell broke loose. No sooner had Emily stepped out of Eugene's room than a piercing screech exploded through the ward halls. There stood Crabtree, her frizzy mane practically crackling with rage like a human Tesla coil, as she saw the revived homeless man being escorted out by Emily. "What in the hell is going on here?" the harpy squawked, spraying spittle as her bony talons clenched into fists. "You stupid, delusional little girl! Did you let that mangy bum spend the night?" Emily opened her mouth to calmly explain, but Crabtree had already launched into another tirade. "Oh, I can't wait to see the look on Dr. Richardson's face when I tell him what you've done. Harboring vagrants, putting our patients at risk from diseases, and God knows what other filth. You're finished at this hospital, you hear me? Finished." As if awakened by the commotion, the other doctors and nurses began spilling out to see the source of the ruckus. Their eyes went wide as they witnessed the snarling Crabtree berating Emily. A chorus of gasps and shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. Crabtree seized on this, whipping around with a wicked glint in her eye as she prepared to rally the mob against Emily. "Well, don't just stand there gawking, you imbeciles. Call the police. Restrain that filthy drifter. This little brat has committed a fireable offense, letting vermin roam the— That's quite enough of your insolent babbling, you wretched shrew." The deep, authoritative baritone sliced through the commotion like a whip crack. A hush fell over the crowd as a tall, impeccably dressed man strode through the parting wave of doctors and nurses. He moved with a self-assured grace, his tailored Savile Row suit and heavy silk tie seeming to exude an aura of quiet power. Crabtree's mouth froze in a comedic O of shock and confusion as the regal figure made his way to the center of the fracas. "Well, my performance seems to have drawn quite the audience, though I must say, your little cadre of professional caregivers leaves much to be desired in terms of basic human empathy." His piercing gaze cut toward Crabtree, then swept over the dumbstruck staff with a mixture of mirth and disdain. Emily felt her heart thump heavy in her chest as the realization dawned on her. This couldn't be, could it? The man straightened his posture, squaring his broad shoulders as his voice thundered through the hall. "My name is Eugene Pashkov, and I am the new administrator of this clinic." An electric crackle of shock and bewilderment shot through the crowd as the man, Eugene Pashkov himself, smoothed his hand over his tousled hair, seamlessly transforming from disheveled vagabond to sophisticate in the blink of an eye. "You see, I have a unique method for evaluating the staff and operations of my medical facilities. I pose as a vagrant, subjecting myself to the degradations and indignities that are so often inflicted upon the homeless in our society. It's an exercise in radical transparency, one that reveals which of my employees are truly upholding the Hippocratic values of human dignity, empathy, and compassion." He turned to Emily, his expression softening as he gave her a subtle wink and a tilt of his head. "And I'm pleased to say that at least one member of your team, Nurse Emily Thompson, exemplifies those virtues wholeheartedly. She alone had the fundamental human decency to provide care and comfort to someone in desperate need, regardless of their status or ability to pay." The crowd had fallen utterly silent, hanging on Pashkov's every word as their minds raced to comprehend the stunning revelation. Emily felt dizzy, her body tingling with surges of disbelief, elation, and overwhelming gratitude. This man, this incredible, brilliant man, had witnessed her kindness and was now validating her with the highest possible praise. She blinked back grateful tears as Pashkov continued. "Nurse Thompson's empathetic actions provide a stark contrast to the contemptible cruelty displayed by others here." His voice hardened as he turned his steely gaze towards the still sputtering Crabtree. "You, madam, you vile, wretched harridan, your behavior was an utter disgrace, a humiliation of everything this noble institution stands for." Crabtree's bulbous eyes widened in stunned horror as Pashkov took a bold step towards her, his presence seeming to swell with righteous indignation. "Your utter lack of basic human empathy and compassion has no place in this clinic, or in the medical field altogether. You are a wretched, miserable excuse for a caregiver." His tone dripped with disdain as he loomed over the shriveled woman, who shrank back in feeble terror. "You're fired, effective immediately." A deafening silence hung over the hall as the enormity of Pashkov's proclamation sank in. Crabtree's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, her entire body trembling as if scrambling to process her sudden, brutal undoing. The crowd of staff watched in a mixture of shock, pity, and undisguised glee as two burly orderlies materialized to flank the former tyrant. "No, no, you can't do this to me," Crabtree finally wailed, swatting feebly at the restraining hands. "I've given 40 years of my life to this place. 40 goddamn years." Spittle flew from her mottled lips as she devolved into a frothing, incoherent tantrum, clawing at the air as she was dragged away in disgrace. Once the melodrama had cleared, Pashkov smoothed his hands over his suit jacket and turned back to address the stunned crowd with an aura of unruffled command. "Right. Now then, it's clear this facility is in dire need of an overhaul in leadership and a renewed commitment to our foundational values." His piercing gaze fell upon Emily, softening with unmistakable approval. "Effective immediately, Nurse Thompson will be promoted to head nurse to right this ship and steer you lot of reprobates back towards human decency." Emily's jaw dropped in a perfect O of shock and elation. Head nurse? Her? She could scarcely process this dizzying turn of events. Just moments ago she was being threatened with termination, and now... "Furthermore," Pashkov continued, I shall personally see to it that Nurse Thompson is readmitted to medical school with a full scholarship, effective next semester. This young woman's talents and compassion are far too invaluable, too vital to be squandered. The world needs more healers like her." The tears Emily had been choking back finally spilled over as her legs went wobbler than a newborn colt's. This wasn't really happening, was it? This angelic, chiseled Adonis of a man had witnessed her kindness, validated her very soul, and was now ensuring her wildest ambitions could be realized. A new life, a fresh start, her tormentors banished and her dreams resurrected in one fell swoop. Unable to contain herself a moment longer, Emily flung herself at Pashkov, throwing her arms around his neck as grateful sobs racked her slender frame. "Oh, Mr. Pashkov, thank you. You've given me another chance. She pulled back, her eyes shimmering up at him as she struggled for words. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for your generosity." A warm smile creased Pashkov's chiseled features as he gazed down at the woman still clutched in his embrace. "My dear, you've already paid your debt to society 1,000 times over with your virtue and compassion. Just promise me one thing." He leaned in closer, his baritone rumbling with playful intimacy. "That you'll save a spot for me on your operating table someday. I want those magic hands all to myself." Emily felt a molten blush erupting across her cheeks. Had this Adonis of a man really just flirted with her? She let out a breathless giggle, giving his firm chest a playful shove as she drank in his devilish grin. "You've got a deal, Mr. Pashkov," she murmured back with a coquettish bite of her lip. With admirable restraint, she stepped back and cleared her throat, forcing herself to regain her professional composure, despite the electric chemistry still crackling between them. Pashkov's smoldering gaze lingered on her for a heated moment before he turned to address the assembled staff once more. "Well, you've all just witnessed the paradigm shift that will be ushered in under my administration and Nurse Thompson's principled leadership. I suggest you chaps embrace this new status quo and recommit yourselves to your higher calling." He leveled his intense stare at each slack-jawed observer in turn, his voice brimming with steely conviction. "Because I can promise you this, there will be no more room for callousness, for apathy, for a lack of empathy towards those who are most in need of your compassion. Not here, not at any of my facilities. That utter disregard for human dignity ends today." A tense silence hung over the crowd before a smattering of hesitant nods and murmurs signaled their acceptance of this new order. Pashkov allowed a thin smile of satisfaction. "Splendid. Then I expect each of you to take this lesson to heart. Nurse Thompson will be outlining our revised operating procedures and ethical code first thing tomorrow morning." With that, the enigmatic administrator turned on his Italian leather heel and strode out, disappearing as mysteriously as he had arrived. Emily was left standing in the middle of the hall, her body still buzzing from the explosive chain of events. Cut to a few years later, and Emily, now Dr. Thompson, thank you very much, stood before a packed lecture hall at Eastwood University, recounting the unbelievable story that had upended her life's trajectory. And that's why you must never, ever lose sight of your compassion, no matter how lowly or desperate someone may outwardly seem, she reminded the starry-eyed students, her jaw set in determination. Because you just never know when they may actually be a multimillionaire philanthropist in disguise, waiting to reward your empathy in ways you can't even imagine. A riotous burst of laughter and applause filled the hall, as Emily cast a sly wink towards the back row. There sat Eugene Pashkov himself, looking dashingly out of place among the youths in his bespoke suit, as he grinned and gave her a subtle nod of approval.